gentlemen, and welcome back to another Warframe guide. Today, we're going to be looking at the notorious, gnarly, nice Nova. Now, before we get started, I'd like to welcome you to this video and give you a little hint towards how you can get involved with this. These videos are recorded on my Twitch, which will have as a link in the description of the video here. If you would like to join us, I would highly recommend going to check that out. If you come and follow us on Twitch, it helps you, it helps me, it helps all of us, because you help me produce the videos. You can then help make these videos better by giving me your input as to things you might think could be improved upon. So, for example, if I say something on stream that maybe not be 100% accurate, you have a direct way of maybe telling me I'm an idiot. So, Nova is an amazing frame who can fit a wide variety of roles that is a little bit complex from an external point of view, but the second you get into it, Nova becomes a very enjoyable and highly supportive frame. For those who have been in Warframe for more than a few weeks will likely know that there are two general playstyles for Nova, even if you've only seen her played once or twice. These revolve around her form, to slow down or speed up enemies. On top of that, you have a very functional movement system through teleportation and damage mitigation through your 1. So before we get into it, let's have a little look at Nova in a bit more of an exemplified manner. Playing Nova requires specific build retention that you'll look at playing to meet the requirements of what you're doing. For example, if you're playing a low-level defense that you really want to speed up and make the waves quicker, thus lessening the length of time you're in that mission and quickening the rate you get XP or loot from those enemies, you'll build for a focused build on speeding the enemy up. Alternatively, you'd bring a Slover if you're doing a higher level mission where you feel like being a bit safer while also getting the damage benefits from your 4 would be beneficial. And that each of these examples would be great for team support as well as also giving your team more wiggle room with each type of mission you'd go into. We'll cover these abilities in a bit more detail later, all the while as you're slowing or speeding up enemies and giving the amazing damage multiplier as well as damage benefits to your team as well as slows and CC. You're also going to be mitigating damage through your Null Star, which works synergistically with Molecular Prime as well as your other abilities. And something you'll notice through this guide is that a lot of the stat weights you're going to be building for help all of your abilities across the board, because their potency all increase with duration, generally speaking. Then to be able to dip all over the place using Wormhole, dropping burst AoE damage with Antimatter Absorb, you might start already be seeing that there's a lot of specific nature towards duration, and that Nova has a very high volatility potential that can really add a lot of value to any team composition you go into. In an ideal playstyle, you'll be using your Molecular Prime in all of your builds to control the enemy and to allow that bonus damage and explosion damage they get from being primed to create a chain reaction. Most builds will be relying on having max duration where possible to really take advantage of your Molecular Prime. And then the deviation can be made for range to get more maneuverability from teleport and to potentially benefit some of the other abilities, although range doesn't quite benefit Nova in such as a way as duration does, but it's there to show that you can have a deviation build and that Nova isn't just a one-trick pony build-wise. Always keeping in mind that keeping your 1 active to give mitigation and survivability, and will also then aid in a damage potential as well as they fly off and land headfirst into the enemy. This is something that you'll naturally get used to and something that becomes easier to manage as you get into playing Nova, and the augments with Nova can be very interesting and not so much change the way you play, but will strengthen the builds you are using right off the bat anyway. So with a brief overview of how Nova plays and knowing why she is as good as she is, let's take a look at some of the elements that make Nova what she is. Nova, right off the bat, is obtained from the Raptors on Europa. Yeah, those big lovely dudes that appear from the silos that require you to literally use Dynamite C4, much like Solid Snake would, to blow the ever-loving hell out of them. The chassis and neuroptics both share a 38.72% drop chance, and the systems have a 22.56% drop chance. I would highly recommend, if you are going to farm these guys, take a lot of crowd control, take some magnetic damage with some corrosive, and it will make your life much easier. If you want a more in-depth analysis as to how to fight the Raptors, I have a boss guide linked somewhere around the screen that you can take advantage of to understand how these bosses work better. Now let's take a look at Nova's initial stat weights at level 30, shall we? With the regular version of Nova, you will have 300 health, 225 shields, 65 armor, 225 energy, 1.2 speed, 2 polarities, and 1 aura slot. The Prime variant will have 300 health, 300 shields, so a slight improvement on shields, 65 armor, 262 energy, again a slight improvement on energy, 1.2 sprint speed, 3 polarities, and 1 aura slot. Now, Nova doesn't really come with much that's unique in terms of this, it's just a general improvement across the board, but modding Nova is quite simplistic, and thankfully, most of her builds are quite cross-relatable, so one build, when you forward for it, will generally work quite nicely for the other build you go for as well. Let's have a quick look at these abilities then, shall we? So Nova's passive is not a very fascinating one, but it's nice to know what it does. So Nova's passive is when Nova is knocked down, she will then cause a massive knockdown to anyone within range. So if she gets knocked down, everyone else gets knocked down as well. It's pretty straightforward, it's pretty simplistic, there's nothing really fancy about it. It does a small initial amount of damage. So at the lower levels, it might give you a bit of a wiggle room to be able to get out of a situation somewhere, but, out of all the passives in the game, it's definitely not one of the fanciest. But it's a bit funny to watch everyone else fall down when you fall down. Nova's one is called Null Star. Nova creates 6 orbs that orbit her and automatically launch themselves at enemies within 12 meters. Each particle inflicts 200 slash damage and grants 5% damage reduction whilst orbiting her. With max duration, which is advised, especially working in conjunction with Molecular Prime, you'll have a max of 18 stars floating around you, giving you 90% damage mitigation. Which is great! And you'll want to make sure you refresh this whenever it falls off to make sure you keep this consistent amount of damage mitigation up at all times. The damage of the explosions from the Null Stars when they hit an enemy is dictated by power strength. The distance the orbs can travel from your body is dictated by power range, and the number of orbs, as already mentioned, is dictated by duration. The augment for Null Star is called Neutron Star. Neutron Star allows you to recast your 1 whilst Null Star is active to detonate all remaining orbs around you, dealing a huge amount of damage to anyone within range. As an ability, this basically turns you into a miniature nuke on legs. It's a very useful ability for a knockdown sake and also a oh crap moment I want to get out of this scenario, but as an added benefit it means you can then recast your 1 to get your stacks of Null Star back up as well. Now the damage of the explosion is based on ability strength and the radius of explosion is based on ability range. This is cool because, again, you turn yourself into a nuke. What's more interesting than being able to walk around blowing the crap out of things in synergy with the other abilities you'll have, which can also blow the crap out of everything, and also having the ability of having constant full stacks of mitigation running as well. Antimatter Drop is Nova's 2. Nova creates a volatile orb of antimatter which is steered using the aiming reticle. So you fire it off and it goes in the direction of whichever way you're aiming. This orb absorbs all damage when shot at by allies or yourself, and once the orb makes contact with a solid object, it will detonate and inflict 200 base damage plus 400% of all damage absorbed as radiation damage, and with an explosion radius of 15 meters. When the orb comes into contact with an enemy, 10 radiation damage is inflicted prior to the detonation, which is not a lot, but it's quite useful to know, as that can then act as crowd control should you so wish. So the idea here is you fire off your 2, you put some damage into it, it then blows up, everything else then blows up with it. It's a lot of damage, it's very powerful. The base damage and contact damage are affected by ability strength, while the absorb multiplier is not. Damage benefit from power strength is minimal, so even when going from a minimum strength build, like Speedbird for example, you're still going to get a very large benefit of damage from this build, especially if you load it up with damage. You can only load up each orb with a maximum of 50,000 absorbed damage, so keep that in mind. The explosion radius is not affected by range, which is a big annoyance, realistically speaking, because it means it's not going to scale tremendously well, and you can't build specifically for it. And looking directly at the orb will slow it down significantly, allowing you to fill it up with more damage like so. It also has infinite length, so long as it has not hit a physical target, so you can keep directing it so long as you are keeping an eye on it, like so. Because there is no scalability with range, this is a very situational ability that you're specifically going to use more than likely when their enemy are very clumped up, and it's not really going to be a priority of cast unless you find a scenario where there are just a lot of enemies around you. It's a very fun ability, and it can give some very funky little scenarios where enemies will fly off really sporadically. But I find the best way to use this is to aim down at your feet, shoot it as it's on the ground, and then everything around you dies. Again, in conjunction with using the Augment for your one, not only do you have a self-detonation, but you have another self-detonation which can just add to that as well. The Augment for Antimatter Drop is called Antimatter Absorb. This will allow the Antimatter Drop to absorb enemy bullets within 3 meters of the orb, increasing its damage when it explodes. So not only do you then have your own damage being directed into it now, but you have enemy damage which can now dictate the damage of the orb on top of that as well. Which is pretty freaking cool when you think about it, because that means you don't personally need to be the one filling it up with that absorbed damage to make the most out of it. So if you feel like having a bit of a focus build towards your antimatter bomb, then this can be quite useful for that. And, you know, it's a nice little ability to use. I personally don't use it all too often, but it's one of those abilities that can have a lot of fun, and if you are going to use it, using this Augment definitely benefits it quite substantially. Now, if you've ever been a wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey Time Lord, this might be just up your alley. Nova's 3 is called Wormhole. Now, Wormhole is an ability that creates a wormhole, so to say, that allows you to travel through it to the destined location. The wormhole lasts initially for 16 seconds with initial distance of 50 meters. The portal will collapse after 4 uses and after the 16 seconds as well. This can be used by allies. So if my handy-dandy allies come up here for a moment and start using the portals for me, as we see, they can then travel through as well, but you've got to make sure that when it's all been used, that you replace the portal should you wish. This, in turn, can allow you to make some good escapes, allow you to make some good avenues for your team to walk through, and it's a very funky build, especially with a very large range build. For using on the plains of Eidolon, for example, this can be a very fun ability, and I personally like using this with a non-molecular prime build, but it is a very funky ability, and with the usefulness for your team as well as being able to affect NPCs, you can tell you're going to have a bit of fun with this. Be warned, you will be flagged as a troll if you decide to shove this in front of a objective waypoint and then force people to go back on themselves. Don't be that guy. I'm looking at you, Billy. The duration of the portals, as mentioned, is affected by ability duration, and the length of travel is affected by ability range, and the amount of teleport, the amount of people that can use them, or the amount of times the portals can be traveled to, cannot be affected by anything. So they have that initial 4 uses, and that is it. The Augment for Wormhole is called Escape Velocity. This is a lovely little augment, and it's an augment you're definitely going to want if you're specializing in your wormhole. Specifically speaking here, when you are building for Wormhole, chances are you're using it for a very specific reason, and if you are building for Wormhole, you'll definitely want this augment. This will speed up your travel distance by 50% for 7 seconds once you have traveled through the initial wormhole. And this counts for all people to travel through, so once you go through, your teammate can do the same. Like so. So if we come back a moment, and then we'll have all our teammates go through, and they too will gain that speed boost, which is lovely because then they can zip around like a speedy Gonzales. And as you can tell, this is again very good if you are building for that sort of travel distance. Not something that's going to greatly affect you in all situations, but it's nice to have a bit of speed if you're trying to clear up maps or you're trying to get across the plains of Eidolon or a very open distance, for example. Now for the ability you've all been waiting for. Molecular Prime, Nova's 4. Molecular Prime with an ability which will unleash a radial wave. The wave starts out at 5 meters away from Nova and radiates at a speed of 5 meters per second for 6 seconds. All enemies in range then become primed for 30 seconds. The wave expansion rate and final size are based on duration, so this is where it all comes into play. Primed enemies move and attack at a 30% slower speed and detonate upon death, like so. The blast from the explosion will deal 800 blast damage to enemies within 10 meters, and all sources of damage will be multiplied by 200% against the primed enemies. The speed debuff is affected by power strength. This in turn means if you build bonus power strength, you're going to slow the enemy down. If you go below 100%, it will instead speed up the enemy. And this is where you get the terminology Speedver and Slowver, because these are the two fundamental ways you play Nova. And because of the explosion regards of build, this often ends up allowing you to chain the explosions together. So for example, you shoot one dude who explodes, a primed enemy nearby will then likely explode as well. Let's look at this poor little sausage here. He's going to blow up, and he's going to blow up. And then if there was another guy behind him, they would blow up as well. Nova is a phenomenal frame for this regard. Let's have a quick talk about the speed debuff, shall we? So as we've always said, it is affected by power strength. 145% power strength is enough to give you a maximum speed reduction of 75%. You cannot go any slower than 75%. This will not benefit the slow. If you go above the 145%, it won't affect the slow, however, it will affect the explosion damage when an enemy blows up. So ideally, you're aiming for at least 145% power strength, and anything above that is just better for the explosion at that point, so it's really up to you whether you go beyond that mark. Right now, with current build limitations, a decent speed build will get you, a decent Speedver build will ask you to get to a 40% power strength in order to get a 30% speed up to attack speed and movement. Using overextended is pretty much the only way of obtaining this. However, having somebody with power donation is a way you can also go even further. However, the benefit of speed does not scale as well as the slow does. So slow is definitely the more prompt build to go for, but if you're wanting a map to go quicker for yourself, or if you want to speed up the enemy as we mentioned earlier, then Speedver is always very good for that as well. And a good Nova will understand the difference between both, so it's worth playing around with each to make sure you understand how the different builds will function. Now, as I said before, the explosion radius is affected by power range, and the explosion damage is affected by power strength. So use this and play around with it, figure out how the mechanics work, because this will be the determining factor, and it's probably where the biggest complexity lies in terms of how it affects enemies and how it then causes the chain reaction. But superficially, it's not too complicated once you get past the mechanics of the sciencey bits, if you get my drift. The Augment for Molecular Prime, and is probably one of my favourite augments so far. It's quite a recent one. It's called Molecular Fission. When an enemy is affected by Prime Acceleration is killed, it will restore 2 Null Star charges. So this doesn't directly affect your Molecular Prime, so to say, but it is a beneficial augment for your 1 as well. It just so happened it's specifically there for to be modded for your 4. So if we put this into example, so we activate my 1, get those Null Stars flowing, those will then fly off and start jamming themselves into the enemy like so. I'm now down to 14, 13, 12. Oh no, I've now dropped down to 10. My mitigation is is no longer where I want it to be. So I'm going to activate my 4. These guys are now going to become primed, and my Null Stars will start regenerating. As you can see, every time an enemy dies, that's 2 Null Stars regenerating, bringing my mitigation back up. And as the Null Stars themselves are killing things, they'll just naturally bring back your Null Stars. So as you're using Null Stars, you're generating Null Stars. This is really, really great. And in most situations means you won't even need to use your augment for your 1 either, unless you're specifically trying to blow things up. This augment is going to be fundamental for any build, whether you go speed, whether you go slower. If you can get this, use it. And you definitely want to level it up to full, because even at level 1, unleveled, it'll still guarantee regenerating at least 1 Null Star. However, at max level, it will regenerate 2 with every enemy you kill. So long as you have your 4 active at a consistent rate, you will never run out of Null Stars. And so long as you have your max number of Null Stars at 18, you will never drop below that high level of mitigation that you get from having Null Star active. Now, we're going to take a quick look at the builds. We're not going to look at any crazy wicked builds. We're going to look at the fundamental builds that cover speed and slower, because that's what everyone wants to know. And seeing this is just a basic guide, we're not going to go too far into detail here. Now, the build we're looking at right now is the slower build. In terms of aura mod, it's very subjective. Choose what you want. If you have Arcane Energize, then Corrosive Projection or something else will be useful. But if you don't have Arcane Energize to regenerate your energy, then I'd highly advise using an Energy Siphon, because you're going to be casting like a mother trucker to keep your Molecular Prime up. Now, the fundamental key, as we mentioned earlier, is duration. On both speed and slower, you want max duration at 301% if you can get there. Having Prime Continuity or Regular Continuity, Constitution, you're going to be using Narrow-Minded, you're going to be using Augur Message for that duration. Now, Prime Flow is extremely useful here because you are going to be casting like a mother trucker. If you so wish, because you're using Prime Flow and you have all that excess energy, swapping out an Augment or possibly even one of the duration mods to put Quick Thinking on there for that little bit of survivability is very viable as well. Now, to obtain the power strength of 145%, my recommendation is to always use Intensify in conjunction with Power Drift. This combination is going to give you one of the more consistent Slover builds out there, and if you want to build more power strength to make the potency of the explosions from Molecular Prime better, then again you can swap out certain things to make that happen. And at some point when it comes to the duration, you kind of have to think to yourself, have I built enough duration to cover the area I'm in? For example, if you're in a much more condensed area, having max duration won't always be as beneficial because then it just goes outside of the useful area. And what you have to remember is the duration affects the range of your Molecular Prime, because the travel time is based by duration, and that in turn is the range. Range does not allow your Molecular Prime to get bigger initially, it just increases the radial explosion of the primed enemies. So duration is key. And on the adverse side of things, this is your Speedver build. It looks very similar, and that's because it is, because you've made very few changes. The only difference here is you've gained a little bit of range unnecessarily because of the mod you swapped out, and this is overextended. This is how you drop down to that 40% power strength mark to get Speedver. Now, again, you can use power donation from somebody else, but you'll need an organized team to get that. You can then swap out the power drift for something else, whether it be speed drift or cunning drift for that extra bit of range. It's entirely down to you. But again, duration is key. Efficiency is nice as well, but alas, if you're building for fleeting expertise does not connotate to a good speed or slower build because you're losing duration. So realistically, the only efficiency mod you want to use is Streamline in this scenario. So hopefully this guide has been of some use to you. Nova is an amazing frame, and if you have the opportunity to, give her a play because she is an utmost amount of fun and one of the more sought after frames in any composition you can get in. If you've liked this video, consider leaving a like, maybe share it to your friends, tell your family, tell that goldfish that you just bought about it, and leave a comment down below if you think I should be doing a guide on a specific frame or different content you might want to see. If you want to come and join us, these lovely lads here joined us from our Twitch channel, and they have helped dictate how this video has been constructed, along with the amazing Twitch chat that we've been dealing with as well. There'll be a link to all that down in the chat, and if you do feel like joining us, we'd love to see you there. So thank you for watching, guys. Hopefully I'll see all you top hatters in the next video, and I'll see you next time. Ta-ra!